On February 5th, 2001, Las Vegas police received a call from a general manager of a local storage facility. A foul odor had lingered over the facility for the last 2 months, growing more intense with each passing day. 2 of the employees had sought out the source of the smell. Using their noses, they traced the scent to a storage unit 317. As is permitted by the terms of the lease, the 2 employees broke the lock and lifted the gate into the unit. They were immediately struck by a putrid, noxious stench that threatened to knock them off their feet. The 2 men knew what this smell meant. It was the smell of death. When the police arrived, they noticed a green trash can pushed into the back of the storage unit. It was one of those large ones that you push to the curb on trash day. Its lid had been taped shut with duct tape and saran wrap, but the plastic had split along the sides and bottoms of the can, and a black goo now oozed out of it. That was the source of the smell. Police detectives carefully cut along the rim of the can, and as they slowly lifted the lid, black goo and maggots spilled out onto the floor. They looked into the trash can and discovered the decomposed body of an elderly woman. She was submerged up to her neck in her own fluid of decomposition, and a plastic bag was tied over her head. It was obvious to anyone that this woman had been murdered. Beyond the gruesome sight, the police noticed something else peculiar. Stacked all around the unit were numerous books about astrology, witchcraft, black magic, talismans, and devil worship. Police inquired from the storage facility's manager as to the individual who rented this unit. The manager said her name was Brookey Lee West. In recent years, news media has begun to reevaluate and deconstruct the satanic panic, a bout of mass hysteria that afflicted the United States for over a decade. But what if it wasn't just hysteria? What if some of it was true? Ritual Rewind brings you into the darkest corners of the 1980s, uncovering the crimes, conspiracies, and occult fears that shaped a generation. Tonight, we rewind it back to 2001 and dive into the story of the Witch of Las Vegas, Brookey Lee West. It's another tale of familial tragedy, mental illness, and hereditary rage. It's the case of the devil in the storage unit. I'm your host, Drew, and you're listening to The Ritual Rewind. Immediately upon discovery of the body, investigators attempted to contact Brookey Lee West, but they were unable to get a hold of her. And the address she had on file was bogus, despite the fact that she had rented this unit since June 1998 and had always paid her dues on time and in cash. Transferring the body to the morgue proved to be an issue and required the rental of a U-Haul truck. The body could not be removed from the trash can, and the trash can could not be tipped on its side for fear of losing precious evidence. Once it arrived at the coroner's office, the trash can was drained through a sifter, and then the body was laid out onto the slab. The woman's body had skeletonized. Her flesh had liquefied into a gelatin-like mold. The proper medical term for this, adipocere, and is produced by the decomposition of body fat. It meant that this woman had been in the trash can for at least 6 months, but most likely she had been in there for years. The coroner tagged her with the moniker Jane Mini Storage Doe, and further investigation of the storage unit revealed a social security card for an elderly woman named Christine Smith. Could this be the woman in the trash can? Christine Smith was born on Valentine's Day in 1932 in Ennis, Texas, and she lived a troubled, chaotic life from her birth to her death, some of her own making and some out of her control. A prepubescent Christine was molested repeatedly by a family member. At the age of 13, she quit school. By the age of 16, she was married against her parents' wishes. Christine and her new husband moved to Houston, Texas, where he forced her into prostitution. And within less than a year, she called her father and asked him to come rescue her. He did, and she moved back home. It wasn't long after that she met a man named Leroy Smith, Brookey Lee's father, at a skating rink in town. Leroy Smith also had a crappy childhood. He was only 5 years old when he witnessed his father chop his mother's head off with a machete. And when his father was sent to prison, Leroy was left in the care of his 3 older sisters, who wanted nothing to do with him. They pinned a note to his jacket that read orphan and placed him on a bus that drove out of town. He spent the rest of his adolescence living out of tents until he lied about his age and joined the army. And it's how he ended up in Ennis, Texas, where he met Christine. It was a brisk, heated love affair, and within weeks of their initial encounter, Christine proclaimed that she was pregnant. And spoiler alert, she wasn't. But Leroy didn't learn this until 3 months after they had tied the knot. He wanted to annul the marriage, but for some reason, he didn't. Instead, their marriage devolved into tumultuous arguments as well as drugs and alcohol abuse. One night, while Leroy was passed out, Christine retrieved his gun, pressed it against his head, and pulled the trigger. It wasn't loaded. So Christine put the gun under her pillow and went to bed. Brookey Lee was born into this in June of 1953. She had a baby brother, Travis, who was born 3 years later. Leroy Smith was a police officer in El Paso, Texas, until he got fired for being too racist. He moved his family to Bakersfield, California. There, Christine began an affair with a married man. And like most married men who began affairs, this man promised Christine that he would leave his wife for her. That was, of course, not the case. So on one night in January 1961, Christine met the man one last time for drinks. But unbeknownst to him, Christine carried under her coat a sawed-off shotgun. And as they sat down at the table, Christine positioned the gun on her lap and shot him. The man survived the blast, and Christine was sentenced to prison for 14 years. Christine would brag about this attempted murder to anyone who would listen for the rest of her life. While Brookey Lee's mother was in prison, Brookey Lee was left in the care of her father. Not wanting to have to explain to his son where their mother was, Leroy instructed Brookey Lee to tell her brother Travis that Christine, his mother, had died. Leroy then promptly dropped the 2 children off at a local orphanage. There, Brookey Lee and Travis thrived and felt the love that they were denied at home for so long. However, it was short-lived. 2 years later, Leroy arrived on their doorstep. Christine had been released from prison on good behavior, and she wanted her children back. Travis was shocked to discover that the mother he believed to be dead had been resurrected. He started using drugs at the age of 9 years old, and he never stopped. The family eventually moved to San Jose, California, where Leroy met a well-endowed female neighbor and became enamored with her. She was rumored to be a practicing witch and taught Leroy how to cast spells. Leroy claimed that the witch would speak to different demons and they would attack people and afflict them physically. He became obsessed and spent many evenings under the witch's tutelage. They'd wear black robes, sit in dark rooms, and recite incantations. And I'm sure there was also some sex involved. Christine eventually grew tired of Leroy and his obsessions, and finally divorced him. She sought out help for her substance abuse and became religious. Brookey Lee was over it as well, and jumped ship as soon as she could. She enlisted in the Army at the age of 18 and was sent to basic training in Alabama. She hated the regimented lifestyle and quickly dropped out, returning home to San Jose. She soon found out that she was pregnant, and when she told her parents, they, to say the least, were unsupportive. They called her a bitch, a whore, and a slut. Brookey Lee's daughter was born in 1974, and Brookey Lee worked hard and long hours as a legal secretary, which meant that her daughter was left in the care of Brookey's mother, Christine. By the time Brookey Lee's daughter's 4th birthday, Brookey Lee had sent her to a boarding school, and by the age of 9, the daughter was put up for adoption. However, the father of the child, who had not been a stable figure in his daughter's life, refused to give up his parental rights. That is, until one night, a masked man visited his home and shot the first person that answered the door, which happened to be the man's mother. The man's mother survived the attack, and the shooter left a note. The message read, "You pray to your God, and I'll pray to mine. We'll see whose God is stronger." Brookey Lee's baby daddy signed over his paternal rights the following day. But Brookey Lee's baby daddy wouldn't be the last man that she had issues with. Howard St. John was a Suez Indian born in 1958. He was banished from his reservation in South Dakota after a public fight with his father, and he ventured to California, where he met Brookey Lee and her mother at an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting. At the time, Brookey Lee was living with her mother, taking care of her and covering all of the bills. Brookey Lee had been hired as a technical writer and was well compensated for her work, making $65 to $100 an hour in the late 80s. By all accounts, despite her tumultuous upbringing, Brookey Lee had pulled herself up by her bootstraps and had become quite successful. Howard St. John and Brookey Lee traveled to Reno one weekend and got married. Her mother, Christine, was not happy about this. Brookey Lee confided into St. John and said that her mother was a lunatic and she didn't want her around anymore. She called her
a crazy bitch, and I can't wait to get her out.
Brookey Lee's relationship with St. John was not one of sunshine and rainbows. It was volatile, with constant bickering that often led to domestic abuse. St. John was a drunk and a general disturbance to the otherwise quiet neighborhood in which they lived. He was often found wandering the streets inebriated and causing a stir, and Brookey Lee was now responsible for providing for two relatively useless individuals. This ultimately led to a very violent and very public altercation between Howard St. John and Brookey Lee. In May 1994, St. John stumbled out of the garage and into the street. He was holding his neck and blood was seeping out between his fingers. He was screaming, "She shot me!" Brookey Lee didn't deny it. She just claimed it was an accident. He was coming at me and I pointed the gun at him and it just went off. St. John was mad because she washed his jeans. Police didn't really believe her story, but St. John didn't really correct the statement either. He only added that she was a crazy bitch. But that was enough for him, and he wanted out. He reported her for insurance fraud. It is yet to be proven, but it is believed that St. John and Brookey Lee had set their Jaguar on fire to collect on the insurance. At the time, they claimed it to have been stolen. Now, St. John was willing to admit that it had been perpetrated by them both. 2 weeks later, St. John was dead. On the morning of June 6, 1994, St. John's body was discovered on the bank of a river at the Sequoia National Forest in Tulare County. He had been shot in the back. On the night of June 2nd, 4 days before his body was discovered, several neighbors heard a commotion outside and saw Brookey Lee running down the street like a commando carrying out a covert operation behind enemy lines. Could this have been the day in which she murdered Howard St. John? For her account, Brookey Lee claims that St. John had stolen $3,000 in cash from her and left with a group of his friends to gamble it away in Reno. She denies having anything to do with his death. Shortly after the murder, another neighbor claimed to have seen an eerie sight. She witnessed Brookey Lee walking along the side of the road, dressed all in black, head to toe, and her hair had also been dyed black. She looked like a goth witch. After St. John's murder, Brookey Lee moved her mother to Las Vegas in 1997 and set her up in a low-income apartment complex. Brookey Lee would then commute between Vegas and San Jose to care for her mother. But within a year, Christine would be dead and stuffed into a garbage can. Christine made friends with several of the residents at the apartment complex, many of whom would testify about her abrupt disappearance from her residence in February 1998. Brookey Lee claimed to have taken Christine to live with her brother Travis in Northern California. Travis, a drug addict, had been missing for several years at this point, and he has never been located since. Some speculate that Brookey Lee had murdered her brother and disposed of his body far better than she had with Howard St. John or her own mother. But a more likely scenario is that Travis, who had been living on the streets for many years at that point, died of a drug overdose and ended up as a John Doe in some morgue in some city in Northern California and was unceremoniously buried in a pauper's grave. Prior to Christine's discovery, Brookey Lee had invited a co-worker to visit her at her apartment in Las Vegas. The co-worker noticed the home was decorated with occult-themed artwork and statues. There were voodoo dolls and shrunken heads. Books on Satan and witchcraft were scattered about. Brookey Lee must have seen the confusion and concern on her co-worker's face because, unprompted, she confessed that her dad was a powerful warlock who had gifted her with psychic powers. Brookey Lee claimed that from a young age she would have premonitions. She believed that she had witnessed the tragic events of the TW-8 Flight 800 in a dream. TWA Flight 800 departed JFK Airport in the summer of 1996 and exploded over the Atlantic Ocean, killing all 230 people on board. And when she lived in San Jose, Brookey Lee remembers dreaming of the murder of a pregnant woman, only to hear about it on the news the following day. She would do psychic readings for her friends, but instead of reading their palms or tarot cards, she would read marbles. She would have them hold the marble and then take it from them, and with it, there was a transference of energy that allowed her to see into their future. The coworker was weirded out by the imagery in the apartment and faked a sudden illness and excused herself from the premises. She never spoke to Brookey Lee again. After Christine was found in the storage unit, detectives were granted a search warrant for Brookey Lee's Las Vegas residence. There, they found ATM withdrawals from Christine's bank account after she was presumed dead. They also found the duct tape used to seal the container, as well as the key to the lock on the storage unit's gate. Brookey Lee was arrested on February 5, 2001, and charged with murder the following April. The prosecutors theorized that Christine's demise may have been brought about as part of a satanic ritual sacrifice, but instead of presenting a satanic ritual at trial, he presented a more pedestrian reason for the murder, something as simple as hate and greed. Brookey Lee hated her mother. That was no secret. She told everyone that. But Brookey Lee continued to collect Christine's social security checks long after her death. Prosecutors believe Brookey Lee drugged her mother, taped the bag over her head, and dumped her in the garbage can. And in it, she died a slow death. A forensic pathologist testified that because of the state of decomposition in Christine's body, he couldn't determine the cause of death and couldn't account on whether the plastic bag had been placed over Christina's face before or after her death. But he said he felt it was consistent with suffocation. Brookey Lee did not testify at her own trial, but her defense counsel admitted that she had placed her mother in the trash can, but she had only done so after her mother had died of natural causes. Brookey Lee was found guilty on July 19, 2001, and she was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. While in prison, Brookey Lee has sold artwork and fingernail clippings online. In 2012, she attempted to escape prison by just walking out, and she made it to the visitor's entrance near the main gate before she was discovered. She remains incarcerated to this day. In researching this episode, we relied on the book Witch, the True Story of Las Vegas's Most Notorious Female Killer by Glenn Pewitt, as well as the TV shows Snapped and Women Who Kill, as well as a summary of the trial provided by the courts. Thank you for joining us tonight on the Ritual Rewind. I'm looking to grow this podcast, so if you like it, please rate it and review it. And if you're listening to this on YouTube, give it a like and comment. And as always, you can interact with us at The Ritual Rewind on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook. Thank you, and good night.